Cast. So it's just about time. We thought we would go ahead and get started. I think everybody knows how to get out the door. Who's here? I don't think we have any guests in the room. So just in case, the exits are behind you. And I think you can go out that way too. You go down the stairs, out the door. If there's emergency, you meet in the park caddy corner, Cesar Chavez Park. The bathrooms are around the corner. They're a left, and they're on the right. And with that, I think we will go ahead and get started. So if you're tuned in out there, this is the Prop 84 Stormwater Grant Program. This is for our new implementation grantees. We want to welcome you and tell you how excited we are about your projects. And we're really looking forward to working with all of you. I'm going to introduce the program analysts and the grant managers at the end of our discussion, so you'll have a face to put with the name, but we're going to go ahead and get started right now. So here's our agenda for today. You just got the welcome. Next, we'll be talking about getting the grant agreement in place. Then we'll discuss Sequa. Then we'll move on to how to measure success. That'll be your measuring your performance measures. We're going to go on to how to get reimbursed. I know you all listen in for that. And we're going to talk about reporting. We really want to hear from you on a regular basis, and we'll kind of let you know what we're expecting to hear in your updates to us. After each section, we'll stop, put up the slide that tells you the email address that you can send your questions to. We'll try and answer the questions at the end of each section. If we don't catch you, if you're kind of lag behind or we get too far behind, we'll look again at the end and make sure we pick up any questions we missed. So with that, we slipped in one more slide just because we thought you guys would want to get a sense of what your timeline is now that you've been awarded, for those that are on the A list, and hopefully even those that are on the B list and have been getting us their response to comments back. The grant agreement, we're hoping to have all the grant agreements in place by February of 2013. That might not seem too ambitious right now, but it is pretty ambitious. We'll all have to work hard to get that done. Sequa and permits, we're hoping you all have that done by May of 2013. Construction, this is something people get confused about when they look at their grant agreement. It says the end of work date. That's the end of reporting and everything else. So the end of construction, you should think about December 2015 at the very latest. Then any of you who are doing monitoring, water quality monitoring as part of your performance measures, you're going to need to get your monitoring done in that winter season of 2014 and 15. Obviously, if you're going to be all done with the project by December of 2015 and preparing your final report and invoice. So the final report, and this is not the draft report, this is the final report, should be done by March 2016. And that final invoice has to be into us by May 1st of 2016. Your grant agreement is up June 30th, and if you don't get it in by then, you're going to be in a really bad pickle. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you where you can email for questions. It's at dfa_grants@waterboards.ca.gov. And first up, we're going to have Wendy Westerman is going to talk to you about the grant agreement process.
Good morning. My name is Wendy, as Laura mentioned. I'm going to go over the execution process of your grant agreement. You were all sent the PD resource guide. We also have some in the back in case you show up in a little bit. It's brand new, it's on the web, it's been revamped, it's been organized, it's a lot more user-friendly. It's going to go through the process in a lot more detail than I'm going to go through right now. So you use that PD resource guide, it's got a lot of good information in it. Go ahead and flip the slide. Oh, I do it. Sorry, you guys did it for me last time. Okay, there's three main people in this grant agreement process negotiation project. You as the project director or the grantee, your grant manager, and your program analyst. Keep those lines of communication open. It will help you get your grant agreement going and lead to a successful project. Anytime you email your program analyst, I'd appreciate a CC to your grant manager and vice versa, and they'll try to do the same thing. So all three of you are all together working towards a successful project. Now that your project's been approved, you're going to receive a welcome email from your program analyst. The welcome email is going to introduce them and also attach some forms that will need to be completed and submitted back to us so we can start the process. Your project director certification, where you're going to identify who your project director is, your pay data record that just shows your federal ID number, and then a sample resolution. The sample resolution is really important. We're going to have that complete and correct before we can fully execute your agreement. So this is the mechanism you're going to use to accept funding from the State Water Board. There's some main points to it to make sure that it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it needs to include certain things. We need to have the project title be accurate. It needs to say that you have authority to enter into the agreement with the State Water Board. It needs to give somebody a signature authority to sign the agreement, not somebody's name, but somebody's title. If that name changes, we have to redo the resolution, so we just want the title to be included. Be careful not to add the dollar amount. If the dollar amount is off by even a little bit, we'll have to amend the resolution. Be careful not to self-certify. Make sure that the person signing the resolution is not the person that you're authorizing to sign your grant agreement. The signature authority for the invoices will be done on the PD cert, so this isn't the person that you're authorizing to sign all of your payment requests. This has to be submitted and dated prior to you signing your grant agreement, so make sure that it's done as early as possible. The earlier, the better. Okay, the execution process. It's a long process. It's about 3 to 6 months. There's a lot more detail in this slide in your PD resource guide than I'm showing you right now. First off, after you receive your welcome email, about the same time, your grant manager is going to start drafting your scope of work. They're going to make sure that it follows the FAST application, that it has the same intent as the FAST application, your scope of work in your FAST application. They're going to make sure your program analyst is happy with the scope of work. They may be contacting you to clarify some issues. Once everyone's happy with that, they're going to forward it to you for approval. We're going to put it into your agreement template, and it's going to be forwarded to you so you can review your complete grant agreement. Once we've answered any questions you have initially, we're going to schedule a three-way teleconference. The three-way teleconference will be the three people in the triangle, your PD, your GM, and your PA. We're going to answer any last-minute questions. We're going to confirm your start dates, your end dates. We're going to go over some standard language and finalize the agreement. Once the agreement is finalized, we're going to send it through our process, our signature process. That could take a week or two. It goes up to our legal counsel, up to upper management. Once everyone's happy with your grant agreement, we're going to PDF it to you and ask you to sign 4 copies and return to us 4 original signed copies. Once we receive that, as long as your resolution's in place, we're going to fully execute your agreement, and you'll receive that by hard copy and by email. And I say all of that to say that there's a long process involved in this, and we want it to take 3 to 6 months, but there are things that can hold it up, and your availability is one of them. Your responsiveness is another. Agreeing to the scope of work and the deliverables. Your resolution needs to be correct and in place. If all of that is done, we expect it to be done in 3 to 6 months. Okay, in your scope of work, we're going to break your scope of work into 2 sections. The first one will be your general Plans and compliance requirements is going to be your monitoring plan, your QAP, your PAP that they're going to go over a little bit later. The scope of work has to go back to your FAST application. Whatever was intended in your FAST application, the intent of your project has to be shown in your scope of work. Part B will be your project-specific requirements. That's the part that the grant manager and the program analysts are going to do a lot of work on to make sure that it matches the intent of your project and that it's clear and concise and that everybody understands what your project is. In another part of Exhibit A will be your deliverables, your table of items for review. These are the things that your grant manager is going to need to see, either to review or approve. There are two main parts to this. It's a critical due date column and an estimated due date column. Your critical due date column is a very important column. If you miss one of those dates, your grant agreement is going to have to be amended. It's going to trigger an amendment. Your estimated due dates are due dates that can be negotiated a little bit. If you're going to miss an estimated due date, make sure your grant manager and your program analyst know about it, that they've agreed to the extended date, or they won't trigger a due date. We'll just do a modification in your file, and it's a very easy thing to but really watch those critical due dates. Okay, you've all submitted a detailed budget. In your grant agreement, this is what your budget's going to look like. It's going to be a rolled up budget that just has the main categories. If any changes to this, if you get going on your project and you decide that this needs to be tweaked a little bit, that you're using one category more, you've worked that out with your grant manager. If it's over 15% of the total grant amount, we're going to have to amend your agreement. Any changes behind the scenes to the admin costs, the detailed budget that you've submitted to your grant manager needs to be approved in advance of doing the work. So make sure if you're rolling along and you see that you're changing your classifications to your personnel, or you're going to do more monitoring than you thought, make sure that's approved in advance by your grant manager. We have to have that documented in the file. Okay, we talked about Exhibits A and B. I just want to let you know there's Exhibits C and D in your grant agreement. Those are the general terms and conditions and the special conditions. Those items don't change, but we'll be happy to clarify them and explain them to you during the teleconference. Some important deadlines to remember. I just want to go over them one more time. Your resolutions really need to be done as soon as possible, but they have to be signed prior to signing your grant agreement. When we send you a grant agreement and we ask that you concur or that you review and get back to us, we'd like to see that done in 10 days. That'll keep your project moving, your grant agreement execution going on track. Also, once we send you the agreement to sign, we'd like to see that back in the office within 10 working days. Any questions? Nope. Okay, I'll turn it over for Sequa.
Okay, and Sarah Gatsky is going to come up here and tell you a little bit about the Sequa process here at the State Board.
Thank you. As Laura said, I'm Sarah Gatsky, and I'll tell you a bit about Sequa, or the California Environmental Quality Act. Sequa is a statute that requires state and local agencies to identify significant environmental impacts of their actions and avoid or mitigate those impacts if feasible. So all state-funded projects, State Water Board grants, are subject to Sequa and must receive environmental clearance from their State Water Board grant manager before any work begins on portions of the project that are subject to Sequa. Most of you have already begun your Sequa process. In your application, we asked you a bit about where you were in that process. So the next couple slides that I'll go over will most likely be a review for you, and I'll just move over them quickly. So who prepares Sequa documents? The lead agency, who is usually the grantee, is responsible for preparing and circulating the Sequa environmental documents. The lead agency must be a public agency, and so for grantees from non-governmental organizations, the State Water Board will act as the lead agency. This chart is just a very simplified overview of how to determine which type of environmental document you will need to file for your project. The first question you have to determine is the project exempt for Sequa? If it is, then you can file an NOE or a notice of exemption. If it is not, you have to perform an initial study to determine if the project will have significant adverse effects on the environment. If it doesn't, then you can file a notice of, or a negative declaration. If it does have significant adverse effects, but you can mitigate those effects, then you can file a mitigated negative declaration, or an MND. If it does have significant adverse effects on the environment, then you must file an EIR, or an environmental impact report. So that was a very brief overview of a complicated subject. So if you need more information, the best place to look is the Sequa guidelines, and I've given you the web address here. Appendix A has a process flowchart that's very helpful. I would suggest looking at it. Another place to find help is the California Natural Resources Agency. They have a very useful frequently asked questions document. And in the next coming slides, I'm going to often tell you you need to submit some document to the Office of Planning and Research State Clearinghouse. And so I've also put up here the State Clearinghouse web address, and they have help pages on how to submit to them and where to send things and what to send them. So, as I said at the beginning, all of your state-funded activities that are subject to Sequa cannot begin until you have environmental clearance from your grant manager. So I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to explain what documents your grant manager needs in order to grant environmental clearance for your project. The documents you need to provide to your grant manager will depend on which type of Sequa document you file. If you are filing a notice of exemption or an NOE, your grant manager will need the following. First, a one-page project description. That description should be general enough that anyone in the public could pick it up and read it and understand what your project is. It might include diagrams and maps if that helps clarify your ideas. You will also need to provide your grant manager with all relevant permits for your project. You also need to submit a signed, date-stamped copy of your notice of exemption that has been filed with the Office of Planning and Research State Clearinghouse. And finally, you need to submit the State Water Board NOE concurrence form. And I have an example of that on the next slide here. So this is the NOE concurrence form. And the grantee will fill this out, like I said, after they have filed their NOE with the State Planning, or the Office of Planning and Research State Clearinghouse. You need to have your State Clearinghouse number before you can sign and turn in your form. Other information on this form will include an area where you indicate what your categorical or statutory exemption is. And then once you've filled out the form and you sign it, send it in to your grant manager. They'll review the form and approve it, as will the Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance. Once you have this form sent back to you from your grant managers with all three of these signatures, you then have environmental clearance and can begin the portions of your projects subject to Sequa. So the process is slightly different for negative declarations or mitigated negative declarations. The grantee needs to submit, again, the one-page project description along with all permits. They also need to provide the final negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration document, all comments received during the public review period along with the lead agency responses. The lead agency will also need a resolution that adopts the negative declaration or the mitigated negative declaration, and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program if it's an MND. The resolution will also need to approve the project and make Sequa findings. The next thing you need to submit to your grant manager is a final copy of your mitigation monitoring and reporting program. That is if you are not, that is if you are filing an MND. And lastly, you need to turn in the Notice of a Determination, or NOD, after it has been filed with the State Clearinghouse. Once your grant manager has received and reviewed all of these items, he or she will then prepare a Sequa administrative staff report to submit to the division's deputy director for approval and environmental clearance. Here's an example of the administrative staff report. As you can see, the grant manager prepares this and provides a project description, and they ensure that your project description you provided to them matches what you put on your permits and what you put on your other Sequa documents. They also review all the permits you have and your initial study along with your environmental document, whether it be a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration. In the case of a mitigated negative declaration, they also summarize your mitigation requirements. And then finally, they make the findings and ensure that you have your NOD filed with the Office of Planning and Research. Once they've prepared this document, they send it on to the Deputy Director for approval. And once you have that signature and this document sent back to you, your project then has environmental clearance and you can begin. The process for the EIR is similar to the negative declaration. You also need the one-page project description, the notice of preparation, the draft and the final EIR documents, comments from the public review period along with the lead agency responses, the lead agency resolution adopting the EIR, MMRP, and the statement of overriding consideration if you need one for your project. The resolution should approve the project and make Sequa findings. And the final, you also need to submit your final MMRP and statement of overriding consideration. And lastly, you need to turn in your notice of determination filed with the Office of Planning and Research. Once you've submitted these items to your grant manager, he or she will prepare the Sequa administrative staff report, just like we saw for the negative declaration. If the findings of your EIR show that your project will result in significant avoidable environmental impacts and you need to prepare a statement of overriding consideration, please inform your grant manager as soon as possible. Those projects will need to be taken back to our board for approval and may or may not be eligible for funding. So if you fall into this category, please involve your grant manager early in the Sequa process. And finally, I'll reiterate once again that all projects funded by the State Water Board are subject to Sequa and that no state-funded activities that are subject to Sequa may begin until the projects receive environmental clearance. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have about the Sequa process before we talk about performance measures. No questions. Okay, no questions.
Okay, moving right along. Now that we've navigated through the Sequa process, thanks to Sarah, we're going to move on to the very exciting measuring project performance category. We all are excited to have some level of performance associated with our project. It's up to us for the State Water Board to be able to quantify the water quality benefit that your projects are bringing to the state of California, because we will be using taxpayer dollars to pay for it, and we want to know that these dollars are being put to good use. So for performance measures, there's going to be 3 key components as part of this process. The first being the project assessment and evaluation plan, which I will be going into detail here shortly. The other piece being the monitoring plan, which will explain your process for going out and collecting this data. The quality assurance project plan is the last piece, which will define how you will be doing a verifiable data collection process for the monitoring you're performing. Those last 2 pieces go together. They will be coordinated together. But I'm going to go now into detail about the project assessment and evaluation plan. So what is a PAEP, as we like to call it? Some people call it a PEEP. I call it a PAEP. The PAP is basically your document that will outline and provide a framework for your intended goals. How is this project going to translate into a water quality benefit, quantifiable water quality benefit? It's going to be a roadmap for tracking and give you a device for tracking your achievable results. We want to make sure that your results you're aiming for are aligned with your project. We want to have you put your goals up front so that everyone understands, both you and your project manager, the project that you're implementing, is that going to be providing you with achievable goals. The document that says PAP, we do have a template format for this, and it's going to help you provide that document to us, provide that framework, and give us your goals up front. The PAP is going to identify measures that can be used to monitor your progress. This is the what and how will you be measuring. It's a tool for the grantees and grant managers to determine the fulfillment of grant requirements. This is going to give us something to track your progress. And of course, as I mentioned before, this is how we maximize the value of public funds to achieve the environmental results and benefits. The PAP is going to help answer the questions of, does the project meet the intent of the Bond Act and funding program? What are we getting water quality-wise from your project? That is, of course, one of our primary goals. Are the project goals realistic? This is something that you and your project manager need to review together. We want to make sure that the bar you're setting for your project is realistic. We don't want you to under-aim, and we also don't want you to over-aim. We want it to be a good target that is reasonable, but yet at a level of value that will justify the cost of the project. Have ecosystem health and water quality improved as a result of this money? This is, of course, how we the goal of trying to do this kind of framework. Which stressors on the ecosystem are most important ones are my watershed, in my watershed? This is something that you should be aware of. What are the constituents that you're trying to address? You know, are we trying to reduce the peak flows or specific targets? This is something that you should be aware of, and also something that you should be coordinating with your regional board to make sure that you both are on the same page. Now, in our PAP template and our guidance document, we have 6 project categories. The first are 3 here on this first slide. These are the categories that you need to use to develop your actual goals. So the first being planning, research, and assessment. The second one, which will be likely let me back up. Each one of these categories will have its own dedicated table. Not every category will apply to your project. But of these first 3, I think the second one, education, outreach, and capacity building, will be one of the tables you are required to develop in order to quantify the outreach activities that are a required component of this grant. The third category, possible category, being habitat restoration. Moving on to the other 3 categories, the most primary, the primary table that you will need is this pollutant reduction, load reduction. This is going to be where you capture the true targets of your BMP installation. The other 2 remaining eligible categories would be the water conservation, reliability enhancement, and recycling, or flood attenuation and floodplain protection. Unlikely to be relevant. So again, the 2 tables you will likely develop are your outreach and your pollutant load reduction tables. Now I have this is a table. This is the table that you will be developing for each of those categories. This is pulled from our guidance document. It kind of has the who, what, when, where, and how of what goes into the specific columns. this is the table that you will need to develop. This is going to be your framework. This is going to provide your project goals in the first column. This is going to provide your general overall targets. The desired outcomes is going to be the actual specific relevant aspects of your goals. The outcome indicators is going to be a measure, basically going to be what you're going to be implementing. That is going to be the BMPs, the pervious concrete you're installing, the water attenuation, the bioswales, etc. The outcome indicators, the next column, is going to be the quantity being measured. And then the measurement tools is going to be reflective of the monitoring plan, the methodologies you're going to be using to measure all of the outcome indicators. And finally, the most important column would be the targets. The targets is where we're going to look for a actual quantified value. This is where we want you to give a number value, a reduction in your constituent of concern, a value for the actual volume reduction. This is where we need specific, quantifiable values that summarizes your targets. Now, I do have in a couple of slides, I do have an example of this filled out, which will kind of help you understand this table. Because in general, this whole process is kind of hard to navigate. Sometimes this is something that you're going to want to, I guess, work through with your project manager. But moving on. We do have some very specific requirements for your projects that are relevant. Of course, being a stormwater BMP project, we want to see what your post-project flow reduction is. We would like to have that in cubic feet. The targeted constituents of concern, we want to see your % reduction target relevant to the BMP being installed. And again, for the outreach, we want you to provide a quantifiable outreach measure, being it number of people reached, number of meetings held, number of workshops hosted. That is for you to help quantify the success of your outreach activities. Now, these next two slides is where I went ahead and posted, I guess, I didn't summarize this. This is basically verbatim from the guidance document. Each of those 6 categories that I let in, that you saw up front, has specific measurement descriptions. And so these bulleted items are under the pollutant load reduction category. These are the categories that you should be using to measure within that category. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but you will see that looks like the third bullet here is where we're talking about a reduction in mean concentration before and after a BMP implementation. That is likely going to be a relevant category used for your PAEP table. The next slide is, again, this is still within that pollutant load reduction category. These are the categories that you should be using as a measure. And you'll see in the second bullet there, that's your reductions in peak flow or total runoff. Now here is my example table that we developed to provide some real-world perspective on how this table should appear for this pollutant load reduction category. Under the project goals, we have our reduce our stormwater discharge volume, and also reducing our TSS concentration. And we're going to move across, moving across parallel. Each one kind of has its relevant category under each column. So our desired outcomes is going to be reducing our total runoff volume and peak flow. And of course, and for TSS, we want to see our TMDL load allocations reduced. How are we going to do this? We're going to be installing some impervious surface area. We're going to, for our TSS, we're going to be creating BMPs, bioretention BOPs in the drainage area. The outcome indicators. We want to see the volume of infiltration through pervious surface is what we'll be measuring in order to quantify the success of that indicator. For our TSS, we're going to be using our percent reduction in concentration from our influent to our effluent as our outcome indicator. The next column being our measurement tools and methods. How are we going to go about quantifying that? Well, we're going to be using some hydromodification modeling to quantify the volume. For the TSS, we're going to be taking some grab samples. This is also going to be reflective of our monitoring plan and our QAPP process. Finally, the most important column is our targets. This is where we actually put some quantifiable numbers. This is where we get the meat of the PAEP process. For our reduce our stormwater volume, we've put in a theoretical volume of 150,000 cubic feet annually based on an average precipitation of 14 inches. And for our TSS, being reflective of bioretention BMP, we said we think we should be able to get an 80% reduction in our TSS concentration from influent to effluent. This is the kind of stuff that we were going to want to see tableized for the pollutant load reduction, reflective of your project. And this is what you're going to want to work with your grant manager to make sure this is consistent with the project you're developing. Make sure your targets are reasonable and quantifiable. The other two key components are the monitoring plan and the QAPP. The monitoring plan is required for all water quality projects. This is where you're going to be defining the locations and frequencies, constituents you're measuring. This is going to define your field sampling protocols, who's responsible. This is something you're going to you need to have for your grant manager to review. This is something you may want to also coordinate with your regional board contacts, make sure that they're in agreement with what you're proposing. And finally, the QAPP is the document that's going to make sure that the methodologies, those field protocols you're applying are going to be accurate. It's going to provide relevant data. It's not going to be make sure the quality controls are in place. Make sure this is all consistent with the data we would want to upload to our SEDEN database. So this is that document actually comes into us and has a review process and gets certified through the State Water Board. And finally, we have websites relevant for each of these documents. We have our PAP training manual. We have on that link you will find a PAP template. We have a guidance document. You'll have other training materials that you can reference. But start there. And finally, we have our our monitoring plan and QAPP website, which will provide guidance on developing your monitoring plan. And we also have options for a QAPP template. And so, if there's any questions, there are questions.
Yes, there are several questions that came
There's
in.
a very important question. This is Jeffrey Albrecht. He'll be one of your grant managers. He didn't introduce himself.
Did I skip that part?
You did, and I stopped introducing because everybody was reintroducing themselves. So we're really glad we have questions. There are people out there listening. Yeah. So the first question, Kelly?
The first question was concerning Sequa and whether a resolution is necessary for an NOE.
No.
Okay. So the next one was just answered. Where can I find the PAEP and QAP guidance documents? And Jeffrey just provided those links.
There are the links, and there's a copy. You were emailed a copy of this presentation, I believe. So you should have the links in your presentation also.
And then one person is asking whether they can upload the presentation to their website as part of their RFP, their request for proposal.
That's great. We think that's a really good idea, so your contractors and subcontractors know the conditions under which you're working.
And then another person wants to know when the PAEP, the monitoring plan, and the QAPP are due.
The PAEP is 90 days, I believe. Oh, okay. Sorry. PAEP is day 30, and from execution, and the monitoring plan and QAP are 90 days, and so is Sequa. Now, for Sequa, we will probably need to hear from you if your Sequa is further out than that. So you let us know before that draft grant agreement gets finished if you're not going to finish within that 90-day time frame. And the same thing with the monitoring plan and QAP. Keeping in mind that you can't do any monitoring until you have an approved monitoring plan and QAP approved through us. And Sequa, I just wanted to remind people also that it's not your approval process that you're waiting for, it's our approval process on Sequa. So you cannot begin work covered by Sequa and get reimbursement from us until you've had clearance. The state board is required to do their own Sequa findings, okay?
Okay, and there was one last question, is whether they can get copies of the presentation slides because they cannot read what's on the screen currently. So.
Absolutely. If you didn't get an email that included that presentation, send us your email address and we will send you a copy of it. We'll also post it.
And that was it for right now.
Okay, I wanted to circle back around real quick on the PAEP and just let you guys know that the two areas we were going to require that you have measurements for us, performance measurements, are under education and outreach and under pollutant load reduction. That does not mean that we wouldn't love to see additional measurements, or some of you won't have them, including habitat restoration, water conservation or reliability. That would be if you're doing groundwater infiltration with your LID, and of course flood attenuation and floodplain protection, because with that peak flow reduction you could also claim that you were doing flood reduction, and many of you did. And along those lines, if you said you would do this when you gave us your application, we'd like you to actually do that thing. So if you said you were going to do habitat restoration, you said you were going to do flood attenuation or water conservation, those are things that we will expect you to report in numeric value at the end of this grant. So with that, I think we're going to...
I'm sorry, we have a lot of questions coming in now, sorry.
Oh, okay. We were going to take a break, but we'll wait. We have more questions.
This is concerning the PAEP and the QAP and monitoring plan. So if monitoring was planned for this upcoming rainy season, is it not reimbursable then until the PAEP monitoring plan and QAP are approved?
That would be correct. So if monitoring was planned for this season, you have a couple other obstacles too. You can't get reimbursed for work that was done prior to a grant agreement being signed. You could perhaps use it for match once you had a pre-approved QAP and monitoring plan. So it may be that you could use it for match. However, it's unlikely that you'll be able to fit it in for reimbursement. Although, you know, it may be you get us everything we need, you let us know that you're on a tight time frame, and we'll bump you up to the top of that pile in terms of processing grant agreements. So you need to let your grant manager know that you're planning on trying to do this and talk with them specifically about how best to handle that.
Okay, and the last one was still, they were planning on doing the first flush sampling now, and their schedule had it occurring this year, so how long do they have to wait until the monitoring plan is approved? So it's the same kind of question.
Right, you don't have a grant agreement yet. So that will be the first step. But again, talk with your grant manager. We will work with you on this and see what can be figured out. We do need to have an approved monitoring plan and QAP for a lot of obvious reasons, most of which we want to make sure your monitoring points correspond to the project that we're paying for, and that if you're already working with the regional board and they've approved your monitoring plan and QAP, that's something else we would take into consideration. So there are a lot of variables there. If you are planning on monitoring this season to get a baseline, you need to let us know and we'll work with you on that. Okay, so I think it is our little break time. We're going to take just a brief break for all of those people out in the audience. And we will be back. We were going to take about a 10-minute break. I think we'll be back in 5, okay? So in about 5 minutes, we'll start back up again. The camera will keep rolling. We'll just turn off the sound. When somebody walks back up here again, we're ready to go. All right, thanks.